Welcome back. Now, the National Treasury says the 70 billion rand loan from the International Monetary Fund will allow government to provide relief where it is needed. In a statement, it says the money is meant to help the country mitigate the social and economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Meanwhile, the IMF says South Africa has committed to managing the emergency financial assistance with full transparency and accountability. The COVID-19 response loan is not subject to stringent conditions that usually come with IMF loans. Now, South Africa has already secured two loans of around 16 and 5 billion rand from the New Development and African Development Bank, respectively. This is, of course, the first time that South Africa has sought a loan from the IMF since it received one ahead of the 1994 elections. Let's chat to Director General at National Treasury now, Dondo Mogojane. Mr. Mogojane, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it. I suppose the big question becomes, and look, I've even said this even on my Twitter timeline as well, that my Twitter timeline isn't necessarily the best place for the most accurate piece of news. But what you're getting is that South Africans are not trusting that we will use this money correctly. How will we ensure that we do?
Thanks, Arabile. Thanks for having me. We have to ensure that the money is used correctly. We know what the money should be used for, as you said. We want to support the most vulnerable. We want to ensure that we support health infrastructure, frontline services, stabilize public debt where we need be, and also drive growth. And also ensure that the prescripts that we've outlined are followed through by accounting officers of various departments. That's important. It's important because accounting officers have got certain responsibilities dictated to by law in terms of the PFMA and the MFMA, including various treasury regulations. So risk mitigation measures must be put in place, and there's no way that we can err on this one because we are in a very precarious situation as a country in terms of our finances currently.
What is the first priority?
Look, the first priority, I think, you mean in terms of the use of the resources?
Yes, correct. So in terms of using these resources, what becomes the first priority?
The first priority should be to ensure that, firstly, we address the most vulnerable, which we are doing. Secondly, we are ensuring that the impact of health, the impact of COVID-19 is contained. And finally, ensure that we use the remains of what are left in the resources to ensure that we create jobs and opportunities, for the most vulnerable in our society. So I would say those are the three priorities that I think are critical to ensure that we use the money appropriately at this point in time.
What were the conditions then of this loan, if you don't mind me asking? I mean, there's a whole lot of word, of course, around making sure that what you said in the supplementary budget was a whole part of the discussion. But if you don't mind putting us into some confidence here and detailing a few as well of those conditions for this loan?
Look, I think it is important. Firstly, South Africans and viewers must understand that, obviously there will be, conditions. Call them soft conditions for now. Why am I saying soft? This is not a traditional IMF program. It's a rapid finance instrument, meaning it's quick, it's specific, and it's supposed to be for, in this case, COVID-19. The letter of intent, which will be made available at the right time. Why am I saying the right time? Because the IMF obviously should release this at the appropriate time, would be to ensure, one, that we address some of the things that we said we want to do in our growth paper last time. We said the structural reform programs that we must embark on. We have to reform network industries. We said that. We have to reorientate our trade policies. We said that ourselves. We have to lower the barriers of entry. We have to ensure that we support labor-intensive programs, especially in agriculture and tourism. These are not conditions. These are the intent that the Minister of Finance and the Governor has written in this letter that basically says these are things that as South Africa we want to do. And in doing them, hold us accountable for that. We want to reform the energy sector. We've been saying that. And we have to make sure that we are able to ensure that we achieve all the targets that we've set for ourselves in the growth paper that we released last year, among other many things that we have to do. So they are not conditions, Arabile. They are intentions that we've demonstrated that we want to achieve as a country.
Yeah. How much more money are we expecting to receive then? I mean, we do have the World Bank perhaps that we're still expected to go to. Initially, there were thoughts of getting a maximum of $2 billion from the World Bank. Is that still the case?
We are still in discussion with the World Bank. The discussions have not been completed. We are still on that, even if we may not reach the $2 billion target, but currently that's what's on the table. And that matter is up for discussion with the World Bank. We've been engaging with them for a while now, and we hope as soon as possible to some finality.
How long do you think it'll take for that finality, do you reckon, Mr. Mogojane?
Look, we want to speed it up, maybe in the next 2 weeks or so. If we have to be clear, maybe in 2 weeks we'll be much clearer as to where we are going. But on a daily basis, I can confirm, Arabile, that we are engaged with the World Bank country office here in South Africa and in Washington. And our teams in Washington are engaged with them. Currently, we have to agree on the quantum before the matter even goes to the board. We don't have a board date as yet as to when this matter will go to the World Bank board. But the target is that in 2 weeks, it must be clear in terms of agreeing on the quantum and also agreeing on and when the actual approvals will be made in the World Bank board.
Yeah. Very finally, what happens to SAA from here? Is this money going to, in part, help SAA out? Have we gotten any clarity with how much money we'll be able to give to SAA from here?
No. We are clear in the supplementary budget in terms of allocations for SAA. All I know is that the Department of Public Enterprises is still engaged on the matter regarding mobilizing funding for SAA. And I think at the appropriate time, that information will be made available to all. But currently, what is in the supplementary budget stands insofar as funding for SAA is concerned.
Mr. Dondo Mogojane, the Director General, the CEO of our finances there, joining us on the line there. Thank you so much for the time, Mr. Mogojane. Appreciate it as well. Certainly will get interesting with that IMF loan, of course, then coming through to South Africa. So I just thought we'd unpack it just a little bit before we close out to the show then. This is initially what we had received when the announcement of that 500 billion rand finance and relief facility was then put out for South Africa. This is pretty much the breakdown. We then, of course, saw the South African Reserve Bank do its thing as well and aid South Africa in many instances. So we had that 200 billion rand with regards to the loan guarantee scheme, which means that banks across the country are trying to help consumers and small businesses in particular with 100 billion rand initially, which could then be raised to another 100 billion, making it a total of 200 billion rand. We reprioritized our budget then, as was put out in the supplementary budget, by 130 billion rand. So that's perhaps funding we don't necessarily need to make up for. But what we then had is the borrowing from financial or financing institutions of around 95 billion rand. That is the figure that we're really going to talk about in just a minute. And then, of course, all those other figures, a total of 500 billion when it comes to the relief package. And in the end, then after the Reserve Bank then puts forward its cuts in interest rate, then that figure comes out to 800 billion rand. But let's focus on that number 3 then, that 95 billion rand. That was initially the figure that was going to come out then. Let's go off to the next board now, and you will see then this is exactly what has happened so far. This is where we actually are sitting when it comes to the case on this one. So we'll unpack it in just a second then, and pretty much we go to the one before this, actually, in fact, before that financing rapid. In fact, there it is right there. The New Development Bank, of course, according to the BRICS Bank, gave us $1 billion a little bit earlier on. We then had the African Development Bank, or the AFDB, give us $288 million US. The International Monetary Fund yesterday announcing that $4.3 billion loan to South Africa, giving us a square total of around $5.6 billion there, which equates to around 92 billion rand. If you take it to that 95 billion we had on the previous slide, of course, we're 3 billion rand away from that. But as Mr. Mogojane has noted, South Africa is expected to ask for a maximum of $2 billion from the World Bank, which would bring the total then to 7.6 billion from multilateral institutions, making the total 125 billion rand. So that tells you how much we're trying to get then from multilateral institutions. All right. I also just thought then we'd also touch on where exactly this money has gone from the IMF. Now, the IMF under that funding, under the rapid financing instrument, of course, the IMF continues to give funding across the board to a whole host of people here. This is not something that they're only giving to South Africa, and they're different and varying instruments. But under this rapid financing instrument for COVID-19 relief, these are the top 5 countries. Ghana, $1 billion having been received. Pakistan got 1.4 billion. Egypt with that 2.7. Nigeria at 3.4. South Africa getting the highest loan from the IMF under that rapid financing instrument. You make of that what you will then as well. So out of that, then, it tells you exactly where South Africa sits. And these are some of the conditions that the DG made note of then. Mr. Mogojane made note that we do need to follow on and follow through with our supplementary budget projections, rein in that budget deficit, which is unfortunately expected to climb and climb and climb, contain the rise in South Africa's debt as a percentage of GDP. We're expecting that figure to perhaps even hit 100% of GDP by the next 3 years. That needs to be brought down and reined in. The loan is, of course, granted at an interest rate of 1%, and we do have between 3.5 and 5 years to pay it off as well. So big questions around that. Just a reminder then that this loan forms part of the 500 billion rand that South Africa had put in place for that relief package. It's not entirely new. All right, and this is the wording then from the IMF's Deputy Managing Director, Jeffrey Okamoto. He says there's a pressing need to strengthen economic fundamentals and ensure debt sustainability by carrying out fiscal consolidation, improving the governance and operations of state-owned enterprises. How many times have we made note of that? Critical then to implement other growth-enhancing structural reforms. The COVID-19 crisis indeed heightens the urgency of implementing these efforts in order to achieve a sustainable and inclusive growth path as well. He also then went on to make note of the efforts to preserve the central bank's inflation mandate and proactive bank regulation and supervision, particularly for small banks, will also be important. The ANC continuously making efforts to climb into the effort there by the South African Reserve Bank, so it will be critical from here on to see what happens there. This was the note then from Treasury in the end, saying it will also pave the way for government to provide the necessary financial relief required to forge a new economy and mitigate further harm to the economy as well. All right. That's the word then when it comes to the IMF loan. We'll speak a little bit more about South Africa's debt as well very soon, and hopefully get a sense of where exactly things will be when it comes to South Africa's debt